And welcome back to CentralCoastRadio.com. Well, there is a brand new film that I am sure a lot of you out there is going to enjoy. It's called Apocalypse Clown, and it comes out on the 1st of September. And we thought today, to get to learn a little bit more about this amazing film, we would actually chat to the director and screenwriter of the film, George Kane. Welcome to the program, George.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you.
Now, George, this is such a unique film. I was wondering if you could tell our listeners who haven't been lucky enough to see this film so far a little bit about Apocalypse Clown.
Well, if you've ever seen a movie like The Day After Tomorrow or Geostorm or one of these Roland Emmerich disaster pieces, they call them, if you can imagine that on a shoestring in Ireland with a couple of clowns, that's pretty much what it is. It's a post-disaster road movie populated by clowns and a crusading reporter trying to get across Ireland after a sort of a global event happens and the whole country has gone feral and Mad Max in the space of 24 hours. So it's just your typical clown comedy road movie, you know?
How did the idea come about for you? Like you said, it's such a unique idea for a film mixing an apocalypse movie with clowns. Where did the idea come about for you?
Well, the project began with the three central clown characters who were a theatre play was written about 11, 12 years ago by the team of writers on this project, and they performed it as well in Dublin. So we started with those characters of Bobo, Pepe and Funzo, and they're such great characters. We just wanted to put them in a very heightened action movie, almost Hollywood movie scenario. And it actually began in a very different way. For years, we developed it as a sort of, humanitarian clowning gone wrong in West Africa, kind of a Tropic Thunder style premise. And then with swings and roundabouts of trying to get it made and going through COVID as well and not being able to shoot abroad. And we had to rationalize and think, how can we make this work in Ireland? Instead of West Africa. So it was we had to approach it very differently, but there was a brainwave at one point of it, well, why don't we keep the structure of it and develop it as one of these ridiculous, overblown disaster movies, but on such a small scale and in Ireland. And it was such a nuts idea. It made us all laugh, and we thought there's something in this. We definitely haven't seen anything like this before. And I'm pretty sure no one else has either.
What was it about those three characters that made you want to expand on from the theatre show? Was there something about them that just made them stick with you?
Well, firstly, the material was so great. The writers are long-term friends of mine, and we collaborated on a project before this. And I love how they write. And they're just three very clearly defined roles. Firstly, there's Bobo is down on his luck, like a hobo-style clown who hates himself, hates his job, hates kids, doesn't know why he's doing it anymore. He's on the verge of quitting. And then Pepe is sort of at the other end of the scale, where he's like bright-eyed, ambitious, but completely talentless and pretentious mime clown. And then there's this chaotic street clown, as she calls it, called Funzo, who is completely terrifying. She's sort of the cliche of the scary clown, like It, but she doesn't realize it. She doesn't realize how horrifying and disturbing she really is. And that's the fun of it. So she's an agent of chaos through the whole thing. So there's just a really, really nice triangle of personalities there. And as one of the writers says, Shane, he said, there's something really funny about people being way too dedicated and way too serious about a completely ridiculous job. And that's what these guys are. So I feel like you could plug these characters into almost any scenario and make it funny.
Definitely. Clowns are always interesting because there are people out there that totally love them, and there are other people out there who have a almost debilitating fear of clowns. Does that make it interesting for you as the filmmaker as well, bringing them in when clowns seem to have such a, I don't know, what's the right word to use, either a love or a hate from the audience?
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's with It being remade and the sequel and movies like Terrifier and things like that recently, people associate clowns way more with horror and fear than comedy, and it has been like that for a long time. So that's what's fun to do something like this, is to come out with something very unexpected, that the clowns can be funny, but also it's not leaning into those cliches. And we get to play with the Funzo role in that all the cliches of a scary clown are upended because she doesn't realize that's what she is. So we kind of get to make that thing funny again. So it's just it's a different spin on it, and not something we'll have seen recently.
Definitely. Now, as it would be, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who has just worked on a film that was a post-apocalyptic film, and he said that when they were writing the screenplay with the other writers, the biggest debate that happened in the writing room was what caused the apocalypse? What kind of apocalypse would it be? Was that something that you had to explore as well? Like, what causes the apocalypse in your film?
Yeah, a little bit, because, I mean, without giving too much away, there's the clowns aren't necessarily tapped into what's really happening. So it feels, one of our characters, the reporter, has been doing a lot of research into solar flares. And so we did look into that because it's a real thing, and the effects of a major solar flare would be catastrophic and would knock out power grids and, communication satellites, all that kind of thing. So we wanted to basically develop a apocalyptic scenario that suited our characters. So the idea that nobody's got video games and TV and Wi-Fi and internet to rely on, the kids don't have their PlayStations and Xboxes. Now, ironically, it's the clown's time to shine. Everything's gone to hell in the space of 24 hours, and the clowns see this. All they need is an apocalypse to have a fresh start. So I thought that was sort of interesting. It needed to be something not too obvious, something vaguely believable, and something that could happen while they're in prison in the movie. They don't actually witness it, but they emerge back into the world in the aftermath and make a lot of dramatic conclusions about what's actually happened.
We're talking a lot about the fun side of the film, but there's also a serious side of the film as well, where you have these people who want to achieve their dream. Was that something that you were very aware of when you were writing the screenplay for this, to get that right mix of humor, but also the serious side there as well?
Yeah, I mean, the writers originally wrote these clown characters as like a thinly veiled attack on themselves, because they were best known as Dead Cat Bounce. They were a comedy rock band who were very popular in Ireland, did well in the UK and Australia too, comedy festivals, but they'd been touring a long time and it wasn't quite moving on to the next level, and they were starting to break up. So they wrote these clowns as a way to interrogate and attack their own failing careers at the time. So the running joke is that, maybe you should give up on your dreams. It's not a message you see very often in movies. And we think about things like a brilliant movie called Waiting for Guffman, the Christopher Guest movie. And at the end of that, all these kind of just regular folk who live in this small town have had their amateur dramatic dreams kind of ignited by this complete failure of a local play. And at the end, they all decide, they've got stars in their eyes, and they decide to quit their day jobs and lean into show business. And they absolutely should not be doing that. They barely have any talent. They're not cut out for it. And we kind of like the idea that these formerly ambitious clowns suddenly have their dreams rejuvenated for all the wrong reasons. And at the end of the movie, they should not be choosing to do what they go ahead and do, but they're just full of the joy again. So it's a fun irony. And also, we were developing this again in 2020, so during first lockdown and the first waves of COVID and everything, that was feeding into the development of this. And I think it's visible at times on screen that there's a bit of 2020 going on in here. Definitely. But just the idea that, when it became a point where people were being called essential workers, it really told you how inessential you were, in certain artistic professions or creative professions. So you'd have all these performers, musicians, actors who had no livelihood anymore, no outlet. And I think that's reflected in this, that, sometimes there were certain people who actually did well out of lockdown suddenly online, and they went viral for particular impressions they did, or just some other thing they tapped into, that suddenly they became COVID famous. And I think there's something funny going on there, where these clowns are completely ignored and hated and reviled most of the time. But then, this disaster happens, and suddenly they've got a new opportunity. So all that was sort of feeding into it, and how much it is part of their identity as well in a creative profession. You can very easily allow your entire identity be formed by your job or your career or your dreams of a career. And there's got to be a point where you realize it's not going to happen, and what does that mean for you as a person if your identity is gone? It's all a lot heavier than the movie is, but it definitely informs the characters and their choices.
But I guess that is something as well that we don't see explored in cinema very often, but it's something that a lot of us who work in the creative space go through. Like, I'm sure a lot of people went through similar to what I did when I was growing up, and I said that I wanted to become a writer, and I had one parent who was like, is that even a job kind of thing? But also, like you said, during COVID, we saw here in Australia that one of the only professions that couldn't get support from the government when wages dried up were artists. Was that the same for you there in Ireland as well, where there wasn't support for artists during that time?
I think there was a certain amount at some point in Ireland, and for self-employed people in the UK. I'm trying to cast my memory back. I've kind of blocked it out. But I was lucky enough that I was able to carry on some of the work that I was finishing before lockdown had happened. But it was definitely a thing in that if you've tied up, I mean, the classic thing is your hobby and your passion, then if you're lucky, develops and becomes your career, and you're so focused around it that it becomes who you are as well. And for everything to suddenly shut down, and for that whole part of somebody's life to be gone temporarily or indefinitely, a lot of people were left kind of adrift and bereft and not sure what they were supposed to be doing with themselves anymore. It's very interesting. It's always an interesting thing. Like, I've been directing comedy for 15 years. I went to film school. I knew I wanted to do this since I was 15. So sometimes I think, well, what if I couldn't do this anymore? What would I do? I have no idea. I'm at the point where I literally would not know what else I'm supposed to do. I'm not qualified to do anything else. I think it would always be adjacent to this business somehow, but it is something you have to think of it sometimes.
Definitely, yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times now that this movie was made on a very, very low budget. For the young filmmakers out there listening to this show, what were some of the challenges that you faced doing a post-apocalyptic movie on a shoestring budget?
The list is endless, to be honest, but I think we always knew it was an ambitious project because it's modelled on the language of these kind of Roland Emmerich disaster movies and kind of cross-country action adventures. And it was deliberately a small scale too, but in order to achieve that, you need a lot of different locations. We have quite a large cast. The money disappears pretty quickly when you've got to pay for these things. You've got limits of how far you can travel. We shot the whole thing in about 23 days, which is a very short amount of time for a 100-minute movie. So we're trying to achieve a cross-country road trip in the same county in Ireland for the most part. So you've got to be inventive with locations. You just have to be very flexible with the material and rethink things, look at things differently. How could we combine locations or be inventive about how we can get the most out of each and every day? Because we had one opportunity to make this. It was, if we didn't make it now, we would never have gotten to make it. So we just had to throw everything at it and just be flexible, creative, roll with the compromises, and get it made. But you're battling locations, you're battling COVID, you're battling weather problems. We tried to do a hell of a lot in a short space of time with not enough money. But there's no other way to do it. We just threw it all on screen, and luckily had an incredible cast.
Well, George, you have done an absolutely amazing job, and you've made a film that I know a lot of our listeners out there are going to enjoy. We are running out of time very quickly, but before I go, I just wanted to ask, is there anything you would like to say to our listeners out there before they sit down to watch Apocalypse Clown?
I would say that I feel like this is, although it's a small movie, it's in the spirit of a kind of film they don't really make very much anymore, and you don't get to see much anymore. Like, I can't remember the last time I was in a packed out cinema screen watching a hilarious comedy with 200 people. It's something that people don't get to experience very much anymore, and this is a film that's made in that spirit and made to be seen in an audience. It's an out and out joke packed comedy. It exists purely to make you laugh. You think of things like Blazing Saddles, Mel Brooks movies, The Jerk. It's utterly silly, completely ridiculous, completely unpredictable, and it's a great time. So if I was advising anyone to see it with a few friends, have a few drinks beforehand, and see it on the big screen where it belongs.